A combination of Governor Andrew Cuomo's sky-high public approval ratings and his reputation for playing political hardball has prevented many of his fellow Democrats from criticizing the popular new governor, even as they quietly voiced discontent with his fiscally conservative policies. However, this week some chinks have appeared in the governor's armor. Shortly after noon yesterday, advocates demonstrating in favor of the millionaire's tax blocked entrances to the Capitol. They were chanting slogans like, "You say Cuomo, we say hell no." And in the end, more than a dozen of them were arrested for refusing to move. Now, that protest was followed by a letter to the governor signed by 20 Senate Democrats that also voiced support for extending the temporary tax on the state's wealthiest residents. And that was actually the second letter that the governor received on this topic. On Monday, 42 local elected officials from across New York questioned the governor's progressive credentials. At issue was the millionaire's tax. Joining me tonight are two of the lawmakers who signed that letter. Both of them are members of the Albany Common Council, Leah Golby and Kathy Fahey. Thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So we should just go back to the beginning. This all started because, as I mentioned, of a letter. There are 42 local Democratic elected officials from across the state. And Leah, if you would tell me how it came to be that this happened.
Well, actually, I received an email from Kathy about it, saying that this letter was being written, and would I like to join in signing on to it. And I thought it was a good idea, so I did.
So did it take a lot of time for you? Did you think about it very long, or did you
No.
just, you didn't? Okay, let's get back to that for a second. Kathy, who alerted you to this letter?
Well, first I think it's very important to understand that this, just under the surface, there's just been a tremendous amount of discussion about this.
Yep.
So many of us are really concerned that services are being proposed to be cut, yet there's still this incredible disparity in the amount of taxes that people who aren't making that much have to pay versus the wealthiest 3%. Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about it all on Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth. So, I'm associated with various good government groups, Alliance for Quality of Education, Citizen Action, and so this has been bubbling up, and they actually reached out to me, Alliance for Quality of Education, to see if this was something we might want to do.
Okay, so AQE's Billy Easton has been on here on this show. We know his position, and they are really opposed to the governor's education cuts. They're upset. They're worried that it will disproportionately affect low-income school districts. We've had a lot of people talking about that here. Mm-hmm. Here's the interesting part. Before we even get to the response and how this all went, look, I mean, I would assume that you guys both voted for Andrew Cuomo. Or you at least supported him.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So during the campaign even, there was some concern about his progressive credentials, if you will. The Working Families Party, which is a pro-labor party and generally trends to the left, didn't want to sign on to the new New York agenda initially, the governor's platform, because they were worried about things like things that we are now seeing. Union pay raises, a pay freeze for unionized public workers, also a property tax cap. We're seeing that potentially come to pass. It's a fiscally conservative agenda that isn't normally supported on the left. Were you worried during the campaign that this was going to come to pass?
I mean, I think it was pretty clear in the campaign that this was the now governor's agenda. So, but when he was the Democrat, and when you looked at what the alternative was,
well, that would be Carl Palladino. I don't
exactly.
think either of you would be supporting Carl Palladino.
And so I forgot what your question was exactly.
Well, were you worried about it before? In other words, you saw this coming down the pike.
Sure, right. We saw it, absolutely. I saw it coming down the pike. Absolutely. I was worried, but absolutely, I still support the governor because I'm a Democrat and he's a Democrat, so I voted for him. But sure, all along, I've been worrying, particularly about the millionaire's tax and, the impact that its expiration would have on services across the state.
Okay. He would say, and we should be clear, it is not millionaires. It's a misnomer, actually.
Yes.
We're really talking about people who are making $200,000 a year, which is a lot of money, but for people, particularly in downstate New York, is not a lot of money. So there's been some very quiet talk down along the hustings about maybe changing it to skew it upwards slightly. Would that be something that you would support? In other words, instead of starting the floor at $200,000, maybe starting at $500,000, or to make it really more of a tax on the very wealthiest New Yorkers?
If I could answer that, I think that absolutely, we want them to look more closely at this. It was very important to us that there be pushback here. We just couldn't settle for not looking at extending this tax in some shape or form. Especially when you're talking about, cuts to vital services like education.
But you also have to look at. Sorry to cut you off, Kat. But I think you also have to look at living expenses across the state, and so whereas even New York State pays people, New York State pays people a little more, pays state employees more because the cost of living in New York City is
quite high.
Is significantly higher than across the state. But $200,000, north of Westchester is a very decent living, and and I think that anyone earning that north of Westchester should be included in the tax.
Okay, Kathy, you started to say that you didn't want this to go without pushback. But speaking of pushback, I mean, you guys got really verbally slapped down about this. There was the state Democratic Party executive director. It's Charlie King. He's an ally of Cuomo. He was handpicked for that position by the governor, and he came out and said that first of all, there's not a lot of state lawmakers on this list. In fact, 0 of them. And you guys, at the end of the day, are not going to vote on the budget. Because you're local elected officials. And he didn't even recognize some of the names on this list. I mean, look, weren't you scared? And I hate to say that, but there was a lot of fear in the Capitol about speaking truth to power.
Well, we aren't in the Capitol. We're at City Hall, and we're on the ground and care deeply about in my case, in your case, we each represent about 6,000 people. So. No, and I wasn't offended at all by that response. I understand it, and I think it's very important to point out that we are not attacking Governor Cuomo. We're just asking him to perhaps look more closely at what the priorities are, and frankly, what type of New York do you want to see Governor Cuomo? And in my opinion, most Democrats want to see a state that takes care of its neediest people, and they want the wealthiest people to do their fair share.
Okay, well, but the Business Council says we can't afford it. The governor says that we can't afford it. That the state government has been spending too much, and that if you keep pushing people who are paying a very high amount of taxes or a proportionate amount of their taxes, and they have discretionary spending capability, that they will leave and go to, Florida, like Tom Golisano, for example.
Well, I have an opinion about that. I think, I don't think we should be held hostage by that opinion. I think that we should create the New York that we want to see. And that's a New York that takes care of its citizens. That's a New York that celebrates its successes. And I think, I'm doubtful, actually, that, this top 3% would leave New York. But again, it's a matter of compromise, too. We do want to see more businesses moving in here, but I don't think it should. I think you really need to find some balance.
Yeah, and additionally, the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers support the continuation of the millionaire's tax, and we have to, and they specifically they support it as a way of avoiding drastic cuts to education.
But should there be cuts at all? I mean, there is a time that we're facing a $10 billion budget hole. Should there be some cuts? I mean, is that something that you can agree with, that there will be some budget cuts?
Of course there will be budget cuts. We understand that. It's a shared sacrifice. This is about a shared sacrifice, really. And, so the poor and the middle class, the low income, the middle class New Yorkers are are taking the brunt of this. Right? The neediest New Yorkers are taking the brunt of this, and the wealthiest New Yorkers need to pay their fair share as well, and that's what it's about.
Kathy?
Absolutely, I agree with that. And as far as where cuts need to be made, there are some places. Maybe there's consolidation, maybe of administrative costs. But where else can we be making cuts? That's what we want them to look more closely at. Maybe it's tax credits to big corporations. Maybe we can reduce there. Take a harder look. I just think that I'd like to see education and healthcare services receive a little less of the brunt of these cuts.
Well, the Assembly Democrats, of course, have said that they are going to put the millionaires' tax into their budget proposal. We're expecting to see that soon. And in the meantime, we will see how this develops. But it is certainly interesting. I want to thank you guys for coming in. Leah Goldbley, thank you very much. And also, thank you very much to Kathy Fahey. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.